I am 64 years old, and I do not feel old. That is the thing nobody tells you. You get to 64 and you still feel like the same person who drove a used pickup truck across 3 states with $60 in your pocket just to start over. The body slows down a little. The knees remind you of things you would rather forget. But inside, the wiring is the same. My name is not important right now. What is important is that I spend 41 years building something real, and then I watch the people closest to me try to dismantle it piece by piece, quietly, politely, with smiles on their faces. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I worked in industrial supply management for most of my career. Not glamorous, not the kind of job that gets mentioned at dinner parties. But it paid well, it paid consistently, and I was careful with every dollar I earned. My wife, Nadine, used to say I could make a 20 stretch into 40. She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. Nadine passed away 2 years ago, April. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. I am not going to spend a lot of time on that part because I still do not have the right words for it, and I am not sure I ever will. What I will say is that when she was gone, the silence in the house was a physical thing. You could feel it pressing against the walls. Our daughter, Renata, called me the morning after the funeral. She lived about 40 minutes away, out in Maryville with her husband, Greg, and their 2 kids. She said she was worried about me being alone. She said she and Greg wanted to check in more. She asked if she could come by that Saturday and bring the grandkids. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I had just buried my wife. What I did not understand then, what I would spend the next 18 months slowly learning, was that the checking in had a purpose, and that purpose had nothing to do with how I was feeling. The first few months were genuine, I think. Renata would come over on weekends. She brought the kids, Owen and little Petra. I cooked. We watched football. It felt like family. I needed that, and I told myself that was all it was. Then Greg started coming alone on Tuesday evenings. Renata was busy, he said. Work schedule. He would sit at my kitchen table and we would have a beer and he would mention almost in passing that things were tight. Not desperate, just tight. The contracting business he ran had slowed down. A big job had fallen through. He was not asking for anything. He was just talking. The third Tuesday he brought paperwork. He said he had a chance to bid on a commercial renovation downtown, a real opportunity, the kind that could turn things around. He just needed a short-term bridge, $40,000. He would pay it back in 6 months with interest. He had a whole sheet laid out showing the math. I looked at the math. I looked at Greg. I had known this man for 14 years. I gave him the $40,000. 3 weeks later, Renata called and said the job had hit a snag. Permits were delayed. Could I hold off on expecting repayment for now? I said fine. I want to be honest about something. It is easy looking back to see everything clearly. But in those months, I was grieving. I was lonely. My daughter was coming around more than she had in years, and part of me, a part I am not proud of, was willing to pay for that, at least a little. I knew on some level that the attention and the money were connected. I just did not want to look at it directly. So I did not. My son, Dwayne, lived out in Phoenix. We had never been especially close, not because of any falling out, just distance and different lives. He called after the funeral. We talked for 40 minutes, and then the calls dropped back to once a month, sometimes less. So it was mostly Renata, Greg, and the grandkids filling the space that Nadine had left. About 8 months after the funeral, Renata brought up the house. It was not a direct conversation. It started as a comment. She said the backyard was getting hard to maintain. Did I need help finding a yard service? Then a few weeks later, she mentioned that a house on the next street had sold for a lot. Did I know what mine might be worth now? And then, one Sunday afternoon while the kids were watching something in the other room, she said very casually that she and Greg had thought about it and if I ever decided to downsize, they would be interested in buying the house themselves. Family price, of course. Keep it in the family. I could take the proceeds and move somewhere easier to manage. The house was paid off. Nadine and I had paid it off in full 11 years ago. By current market, it was worth somewhere between $400,000 and $420,000. I said I would think about it. I did not tell her I had already thought about it, and the answer was no. The money requests continued, but they changed shape. Greg stopped being the one who asked. It was Renata now, more gently, more reasonably. The furnace in their house needed replacing. Could I help? Just this once. Then Petra needed orthodontia. The insurance had a gap. Then Greg's truck broke down and the business needed a new work vehicle and the financing fell through. I kept a notepad in the kitchen drawer. I wrote down every amount. After 14 months, the total was $63,000, not counting the original 40 that was supposedly a loan. I also noticed something else during that time. Renata had started referring to my accounts more casually than she should have known about them. She mentioned once that I had enough in savings to cover something without me having told her what I had in savings. Another time she asked about the investment account, the one I kept at a separate brokerage from my main checking. And I had not mentioned that account to her in years. I did not say anything. But I started paying attention. In January, about 16 months after Nadine died, I called my attorney. His name is Cliff Bauer. I have worked with him for 20 years on various things, estate planning, a property dispute once. I told him what had been happening, all of it. I brought the notepad. Cliff listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Have you changed your estate documents since Nadine passed?" I had not. He said, "That's where we start." Over the next 3 weeks, Cliff helped me restructure everything. New will, new beneficiary designations, new power of attorney documents. I also changed the passwords on every financial account and set up two-factor authentication on all of them. I moved a significant portion of my liquid assets to a separate account at a different bank, one Renata did not know about. I also asked Cliff something that had been sitting in the back of my mind. I asked him whether it was possible that someone could be building a case against me, trying to establish that I was not managing my affairs clearly. He looked at me for a moment and said, "What makes you ask that?" I told him about a conversation I had overheard. I had come home early from a doctor's appointment. Just a routine thing, nothing serious. And Renata had stopped by without calling first. She did not know I was back. I heard her on the phone in the living room. She was talking to someone, and I caught enough to understand the gist. She was describing me as not the same since Mom died, saying I was isolating, that I had no real support system. She used the word vulnerable twice. I stood in the hallway and listened until she heard me and stopped. She recovered quickly. Said she was just talking to a friend worried about me. I said I understood. I offered her a glass of water. We had a perfectly normal conversation for 20 minutes and then she left. Cliff said, "She may be building a record. It's more common than people think with aging parents and real estate assets." He recommended I consult with an elder law specialist. I did, the following week. Her name was Patricia Kwan, and she had seen this situation. Not exactly this, but the shape of it, many times. She explained what a guardianship petition could look like, what language was typically used, what financial patterns tended to precede one. Everything she described matched something I had already observed. I want to be careful here because I do not know for certain what Renata intended. I know what I heard. I know the pattern. I know that the money requests increased at the same time the conversations about my well-being increased. I know that someone had been looking at my accounts without my permission. I confirmed this later through my bank, who flagged that my login credentials had been used from an unfamiliar device. That last part I turned over to Cliff. He handled it. I did not confront Renata. I want to explain that decision because I think some people would have. Some people would have sat their daughter down and demanded an explanation. But I had watched what happened when my own father confronted his brother over a money dispute back in the 90s. They spent 14 years in a standoff that neither of them ever resolved, and my father went to his grave with that bitterness still in him. I did not want a fight. I wanted something done, so I did something instead. I put the house on the market. I did not tell Renata first. I listed it on a Thursday morning. The sign went up that afternoon. She drove past it on Friday. I know because she called me within 20 minutes and her voice had a quality in it I had not heard before. Not quite anger. More like the controlled version of panic. She said she had not known I was thinking about selling. I said I had been thinking about it for a while. She said she thought we had talked about keeping it in the family. I said I remembered that conversation. She asked what I was planning to do with the money. I said I had some ideas. There was a pause on the phone that lasted several seconds. She said, "Dad, are you okay?" "Are you sure you're making this decision clearly?" I said yes, I was sure. The house had 2 showings in the first weekend. An offer came in on day 9, $390,000, which was slightly under asking. We countered. They came back at $405,000. My realtor, a woman named Jan Whitfield who had been selling homes in Knoxville for 27 years, said it was a strong offer in the current market. I accepted it. Greg called me 2 days after the offer was accepted. He said he and Renata had been talking and they wanted to put together their own offer. A real one, not just a family price conversation. He said they could get financing together quickly. He asked if I would consider pulling the listing. I said the house was already under contract. He said, "You didn't even give us a chance." I said I had given them quite a bit already and I wished them well with the financing. The closing happened 6 weeks later. After the realtor's commission and the closing costs and the prorated property taxes, I walked out with $378,000. I had already found an apartment, not temporary. A real apartment, a nice one, in a building near downtown with a fitness center and underground parking. Month-to-month lease to start, because I was not sure yet where I wanted to land permanently. I had been thinking about Asheville. I had been thinking about Chattanooga. I had a cousin in Flagstaff, and he had mentioned more than once that I would like it there. I moved on a Saturday in October with help from 2 men I hired. I did not ask Renata for help. I did not tell her I was moving that weekend. By the time she found out, the house was empty and the keys had already changed hands. I did not leave a forwarding address with anyone except Cliff and Patricia Quand. I set up a P.O. box at a UPS store near my apartment. If legal mail was coming, it would come there. I want to address something directly. I know people wonder how I could still receive mail after disappearing. The answer is simple. I did not disappear from the postal system. I just did not hand my address to my family. A P.O. box is not magic. It is just a redirect. Cliff had it. My accountant had it. My doctor's office had it. The people who needed to reach me could reach me. About 3 weeks after I moved, I sat down and wrote checks. $63,000 in total, the amount I had recorded in the kitchen notepad. I wrote one check made out to Renata and Greg jointly, with a note that said simply, "This represents all amounts given as personal gifts over the past 14 months. No further gifts are planned." I mailed it certified, return receipt requested, to their home address. I did not call. I did not explain. The letter said what it said. 2 days after the certified mail was delivered, I know because I got the return receipt. Greg called from a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was about 2 minutes long. I will not repeat all of it. The relevant part was near the end, where he said that he and Renata had spoken to a family attorney and that they believed my judgment had been compromised and they were looking at their options. I forwarded the voicemail to Cliff the same afternoon. Cliff, to his credit, was not alarmed. He said this was a predictable response and that the documentation we had assembled over the previous months would be more than sufficient. He sent a letter to their attorney outlining the timeline of financial transactions, the unauthorized account access, and the nature of the estate documents as they currently stood. He also included a brief note that any guardianship inquiry would be met with a full counterfiling supported by recent cognitive assessments. I had quietly obtained 2 in the months prior, one from my regular physician and one from a neuropsychologist Cliff referred me to, both of which showed no impairment of any kind. I heard nothing further from their attorney. Dwayne called me from Phoenix about 2 months later. Renata had been in contact with him. He was careful about it to his credit. He did not repeat what she said, just asked if I was okay, if I had made the decisions I wanted to make. I told him yes. I told him I would explain everything if he wanted to hear it, but only if he wanted the real version, not the version he might have already gotten. He said he wanted the real version. We talked for an hour and a half. At the end, he said he was glad I had protected myself. I appreciated that more than I told him. I've been in my apartment now for about 5 months. I go to the fitness center most mornings. Nothing intense, just a treadmill and some light weights. I found a men's group on Thursday nights. Veterans and retirees, mostly, that meets at a church nearby. Nobody talks about their feelings directly, but everybody is there because they needed somewhere to be, and I think that is its own kind of honesty. I cook more than I used to. I drive out to the Smoky Mountains on weekends sometimes, just to walk a trail and be somewhere that does not require me to explain myself. I do not regret what I did. I want to say that plainly, because I know some people listening will wonder. I loved my daughter for her whole life. I would have done anything real for her. What I was not willing to do was be managed out of my own finances and eventually out of my own home by people who saw me as an asset to be liquidated. There is a difference between family and obligation, and I needed a long time to learn that the people closest to you are sometimes the ones most capable of confusing the two. The money from the house is mine. The accounts are mine. My mind is mine. Nadine used to say, "You cannot pour from an empty cup." She meant it about emotional energy, about the way we sometimes give until there is nothing left, and then wonder why we feel hollow. I think about that a lot now. I think she was right about more things than I gave her credit for while she was here. The grandkids, Owen and Petra, I think about them too. I hope they do not grow up believing what they may have been told about me. I hope when they are older and make their own judgments, they are curious enough to ask. If they do, I will tell them the truth. I will sit across from them at a table and tell them exactly what happened, because they deserve that. But I will tell them in my own time, in my own way. That is the thing I kept coming back to through all of it. Not the money, not the house, not even the legal maneuvering. Just the simple fact of being the one who decides. For 64 years, I have been making my own decisions. Some good, some I would take back in a second. And no one is going to take that from me while I am still standing. I am still standing. That counts for something. I believe it counts for quite a lot. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any grand philosophical way, just the plain practical version. You do a thing, something follows from it. You allow a thing, something follows from that too. The allowing is the part people underestimate. For a long time, I allowed Renata and Greg to believe that my grief made me manageable. And in fairness to myself, I was grieving. That was real. But grief is not stupidity. And I think they eventually confused the two. The moment they started treating my sadness as a kind of leverage, that was the first cause. Everything that came after was just the effect working itself out. What I want to say about ethics is this. I do not think Renata woke up one morning and decided to be a villain. That is not how it usually goes. It goes slowly. One small compromise, then another, until the whole structure of a relationship has shifted and nobody quite remembers when it happened. She told herself stories, I am sure of it, that she was helping, that she was protecting me, that she deserves something for the years of showing up. People are very good at building a narrative that makes their self-interest look like virtue. The honest work, the real ethical work, is catching yourself doing that and stopping. I did not catch it in time to prevent the damage, but I caught it in time to stop the bleeding, and I think that counts as intelligence of a kind. Not brilliance. Just the willingness to look at something uncomfortable and not look away. Cliff asked me early on why I had waited so long to call him. I told him I had not wanted to be right. He said that was the most honest answer he had heard in a long time. There is something to be said for the people who show up small and quiet and steady when your life has come apart. Cliff did that. Patricia Kwan did that. Jan Whitfield, who sold my house without ever once asking me personal questions, did that. Dwayne from Phoenix, who listened to the real version without flinching, he did that too. The network that actually holds you together in a crisis is almost never the one you expected. Renata and Greg expected me to be the kind of man who would rather absorb a loss than cause a disruption. For most of my life, they would have been right. But there is a version of self-respect that only becomes available to you after you have lost something you cannot replace. After Nadine, after that silence in the house, and what it teaches you is that your remaining time is not a courtesy you extend to other people's plans. It belongs to you. Entirely, unconditionally, you. The grandkids will grow up. Owen is 9, Petra is 6. Someday they will be old enough to ask their own questions, and I hope they ask me directly. I will tell them that their grandfather was a man who made a mistake for a year and a half and then corrected it. I will tell them that is what intelligence looks like in practice. Not avoiding the mistake, but being honest enough to see it and resolute enough to move. I am 64. I live in a clean apartment near downtown Knoxville. I walk in the mornings. I cook real meals. I drive to the mountains when I need to think. That is not a small life. That is the life I built back with my own hands after someone tried to quietly take it apart.